Na shukran sana mpenzi mtazamaji popote ulipo kwa kuungana nami katika Karibu East Africa. Mimi ni Saddam Mubale. As the second quarter of the budget is coming to an end, Karibu East Africa is tracing the projections of the 2019-2020. Our reporter Shamira Nagawa talked to Dr. Fred Muhumza, an economist at Makerere University, and this is what she had prepared for us.
As the second quarter of Uganda's budget is coming to the climax, the economy's performance is not expected to be as good due to the weather effects like heavy rains that have affected infrastructure like roads, putting the economy at a snag with the increased expenditure from the government to maintain them. The theme for 2019-2020 financial year is industrialization for job creation and shared prosperity. But one wonders if the performance of the quarter 1 and quarter 2 of the 2019-2020 budget are in line with the theme of the financial year.
The second quarter is going to be quite a bit tough. Good enough we've had some rain, but which has come to higher levels than one expected. So we would not expect the economy to have performed as much as it would have performed, partly because the rain damaged the roads, so the infrastructure had a snag and government had to increase its spending to keep the roads open. So we do not expect the performance to be as good as would have been predicted. A number of other parameters also didn't work out well. The government revenues didn't work well in the first quarter, and we do not expect that to have changed in the second quarter. So the second quarter also may not be as good. The first quarter had shortfalls of almost up to 500 billion. The second quarter, the samples we saw were also not performing well, and the government was looking forward to borrow basically up to almost 1.4 trillion to kind of beef up the revenues that were not performing as projected. And as we know, one of the major shortfalls was the failure to get the FID, financial investment decision, that would trigger investments in the oil industry. That was supposed to come through in August. So when it didn't come through, a lot of things were put off course. I think those are some of the hardships that we might see. We're still waiting for the numbers coming out in the next week on how the quarter has performed on the different parameters. But we do not expect a very rosy picture going by those events that some of them were quite beyond government's own abilities.
20% of Uganda's revenue goes into debt financing, which puts the country in the parameters of debt stress and catch-21 position of the state. It should be remembered that the first quarter of the budget reported a poor performance, with shortfalls of about 500 billion due to failure by the government to get a finance investment decision.
A lot of things are driven by government expenditure, because in Uganda, government is a major driver of a lot of projects. So when it doesn't perform, a lot of shortfalls do happen. The other main driver has been the private sector, in terms of agriculture, where I've said the rains have not been very, very moderate as would have been expected. So that may also be affected. The other one is mainly government projects. And there are quite a number of government projects that have not performed well. We've seen donor releases being lower than projected in the second quarter, a lot of either due to slower processing of government projects, or donors themselves not meeting their conditions that they had put into the projects, or government failing to do the procurement, to do all the things that are needed to make sure the projects are running. So we still have a very slow progress on government project implementation. Now that's going to affect the quarter's performance in quite a number of things. We've seen the end of year speech of the president complaining about the low prices of agricultural products. Now it could be very many things. Some people may think because there's an oversupply, but Uganda has many contradictions that we're beginning to see. That even you'll find the price of rice is low, but the country is importing rice. So you cannot say that was an oversupply in terms of domestic production. There seems to be changing patterns of feeding. A lot of Ugandans are consuming wheat products, things like bread, things like chapatis, those kinds of things that are not necessarily originating from domestic production, but they are certainly competing with the Ugandan production. We have milk that is being poured out there. People are saying the milk prices are very low. We had the closure of the Rwanda border. The Rwanda trade with Uganda was about $20 million per month. So that persistence is also factoring through. South Sudan also hasn't come through as had been anticipated. So we are linked up in the region, but we do not see a lot of sustainable trade that you can say the second quarter is going to be as anticipated, if you really wanted to see the effect of debt on an economy. Because it considers debt is an active parameter that is looking forward, whereas the GDP you're trying to compare with it going forward is an estimate. Because whereas debt is certain, Uganda's debt in future is known. Because the stock is known, the growth rate is known, the only thing we do not know is how will the GDP perform. Now you're trying to compare that data at this point in time, and yet the obligations of debt are lying in the future. And the GDP you're looking at is looking into history. And anything you have in the future is a projection. So the more active parameter for me that we'll be concerned about is the debt to revenue. How much is of our revenue compared with our debt? How much of the money we realize is being taken into debt service? And that has been growing to a level of almost 20% of our revenues is going into debt service. Now the IMF gives kind of other parameters and projections where they would say if you're using almost 20% of your debt, of your revenues to service your debt.
Other countries in the East African region like Kenya and Tanzania are highly indebted, and most of the money has been invested in infrastructure that is seemingly not productive enough for the economy since it's just a one-coin investment. Therefore, there should be less expectations from the performance of the second quarter of the budget, as Dr. Muhumuza, an economist, adds.
Even where Kenya has put it, it's a lot of infrastructure. A lot of these countries have been putting money into infrastructure. But as we've said, infrastructure is one side of the coin. You need both sides to move. So the recent reports that we have been able to see, and some of these have been at least put up in the East African, is to show that all East African countries, none of them is well off. They might be taking pride to say East Africa is growing at 6% per year and above, compared to 3% and above for the rest of Sub-Saharan Africa. But we are in a more precarious situation because partly of debt that has grown, which went into infrastructure projects and is locked up there. It's not giving us the thrust we needed. Because one of the things that has been noted is debt service is growing and eating into ability of service delivery. Revenues are not growing. Foreign aid is reducing, and trade globally and within the region is also sluggish, not kind of picking up very fast. Now that's not a very good situation for an economy. It requires new measures that we need to address. And as I've said, we are not able to do that because you would need a stimulus budget. Now you do not have a budget to stimulate your economy because you have obligations that are binding, and so you do not have flexibility on your resources to be able to do that. So Kenya is in the same situation. By last week we were watching to see that Ethiopia, which everybody was priding themselves, has gone back to the IMF to borrow. And I think they are borrowed, is it 1.9 or 2.9 billion dollars. Now IMF lends you for short-term stabilization. It's not a good sign. It's good that Ethiopia's economy could convince the IMF to lend to them. But in the first place, the reasons for which you are going to the IMF mean you have shortfalls in your reserves. You have shortfalls in stabilizing your currency. Short-term money that you need to buy. That's what the IMF addresses. Now, in Uganda, we are still comfortable that we have sufficient reserves. Our arrangement with the IMF is what we call a policy support instrument, meaning the IMF is not coming to lend to us. So it's slightly better than Ethiopia. So much as Ethiopia may be an envy to people that has been able to attract these resources, that's not the purpose for which you should be attracting resources from IMF. You are really getting into a situation where you require some kind of emergency lending, which is what the IMF will come in to help stabilize the economy. So a lot of this East African region is not doing well. And remember, in our programming, Uganda was targeting to get part of its growth out of the East African and neighboring activities. We're looking at the EAC, we're looking at COMESA. So we did a lot of these investments that wanted to get competitiveness in the economy, to become competitive with our neighbors, to become competitive globally. We have not achieved that competitiveness. If you look at some parameters that reflect global competitiveness, like the real effective exchange rate, is still trending upwards, meaning Uganda is not peaking the competitiveness globally. We have seen an increase, or a continued increase of importation of goods and services, some of which are basics that you should have been able to produce: footwear, clothing, food, as we have said. These are some of the things that we are still importing, meaning we have not been able to produce them domestically, and we still find foreigners can come here and sell them and compete, or even outcompete the Ugandans. So those are some of the issues we want to say. Have our investments over the last 2 decades in infrastructure helped us? So what has been driving the growth in this region, growth in this country, is sadly government investments, government projects. So you cannot say we have reached a level of a private sector-led economy. We are still on a government-led economic development, and what aspects of government are projects of government. It's not even, and it's consumption of government. And remember, government just survives on taxing and borrowing. You don't want to be the main driver of your economic growth. So going forward, even as we design our National Development Plan 3, we need to be thinking on how do we bring the private sector back. But the private sector is really struggling within our means because of less demand. Many of them have invested, but they have not been able to realize appropriate demand to drive and keep their factories running. So we have a lot of factories that are performing below capacity. Poor families, because average income of a Ugandan is still 150 to 200,000 for those who are working. Remember, 68% are even subsistence. They don't even enter this market on an occasional basis. So there is no that signal that is strong enough for a private investor to come and look at Uganda as a destination. And going forward, as we begin the decade of the 20s, these 2020s, we should be trying to address these fundamental issues.
Investing upstream and addressing the catch-21 position by the government would help overcome the debt distress of Uganda and other East African countries so that demand and consumption of goods increases by the locals and governments can collect enough revenue. Shamira Nagawa, Smart 24.
Smart 24. Smart Business.
Fish farming has become one of the lucrative businesses that are done here in Uganda.
Kyabuvunanyizibwa nnyo okutandika process omanye ne gyegwera olunda ebyennyanja ogenda bitundawa.
In this episode of Farm Smart, we are going to be focusing on selecting the best breeds before you start fish farming as a business.
Ati lowooza waliyo omuntu akwata obukadde bwe 3 n'abugulamu ente naye ng'egenda vaamu liita 5 naye nga ye baamugamba nti ente ya liita mmeka 2. So neeno breed egenda kusalawo kuba kati olw'okuba mu byennyanja tutunda body weight, ebyennyanja tubitunda mu kilo. Kitegeeza olina okunoonya ekyennyanja nga kisobola okugejja mu bwangu mu budde obutini.
Let's meet on Farm Smart this Thursday at 9:30 p.m. here on Smart 24 TV.
Smart 24. Smart Business.
Welcome back from that story. Now, in other story, 15 out of the 29 state-owned enterprises has been named for performing poorly, according to the Auditor General's report on the state enterprise performance, with Uganda Railway Corporation topping the list. Let's take a look at the report.
Uganda Railway, that was established with an aim of easing transportation of goods and services in Uganda in the late 1977, is at stake following the Auditor General's report that named the corporation for making huge losses.
Uganda Railways, as you may know, some of you, came during the colonial times as in the purpose of facilitating trade and developing the country. As far as we know, railways used to be the main source of money for the treasury, for the Ugandan treasury. But that story died out with the time, but we know soon it will be back. Railways, you know, covered the whole country, all the way from Malaba to Kampala, Kampala to Kasese, from Tororo to Gulu, Pakwachi. So all those areas used to be covered by the railways, and we are aware all the major towns in Uganda their development, its origin is traced back to the railways. You look at the towns along from Malaba, Tororo, Jinja, Kampala, then you go all the way to Mbale, Soroti, Gulu, Pakwachi. Then you come this side, you go to Mitiana, to Kasese, Fort Portal. All those towns came up because of the railway.
He also noted that the corporation is regaining economically in a short period of time since government took over from private partnership.
The total length, when I mentioned where the railway used to be, the total length was 1,266 kilometers. As we speak, the only active kilometer distance is 251 kilometers. That is Malaba to Kampala. The rest is inactive, but I'll tell you why it has become inactive and how we are going to put it back for the smile of Ugandans. You remember the journey of privatization. Government privatized the railway services in the country with a good intention, of course, to ensure that the private sector would bring in capital, would better manage the railway and develop it further. So since 2006, that's 11 years, the railway was in private hands and it didn't work out. The private sector actually failed. The 1,266 kilometers were handed over, I told you, is now to 51. We handed over a number of locomotives which are no longer in existence, which are packed. We handed over wagons which are also packed, a number of them. So that's literally what happened. But the government, of course, can never give up. We are back and we are going to revive all the 1,266 kilometers on top of building the standard gauge railway that you've been hearing about.
He further notes that the corporation is on the verge of revival once the line is constructed from Kampala to Malaba in the proposed standard gauge railway project that will connect different cities not just within East African region but Africa at large.
The plan to build the standard gauge railway from Malaba to Kampala and the rest of the country is in advanced stages. You know, Kenya had to build all the way from Mombasa up to Malaba. It's a long distance. So for us to build the Kampala to Malaba before that would be a waste of money. But Kenya has moved now up to Naivasha. They have completed that area has been completed. And soon they will build the section up to Malaba and we shall also build our section. Those plans have not ended, they are in advanced stages. So the intention is to have both the standard gauge railway running together with the meter gauge railway, the old railway line. Yes, so nobody should be worried about that. The standard gauge railway is still going on as a project and we are in the final stages of getting the finances. If somebody was saying that they should not build a new one and they concentrate on the old one, that's not the government's plan because growth comes with improvement. Now the old line, of course, serves its purpose, but it is not of the same standard with the standard gauge railway. The purpose of the standard gauge railway is to have a uniform network in the whole of Africa. So it's not only East Africa. So it is the whole of Africa to connect all countries on a similar transport network. When a train moves all the way from Mombasa, it can go up to Ethiopia, up to Tanzania, up to South Africa on the same line. That's the purpose of the standard gauge railway, which is not the case for the meter gauge railway. The government's plan is what we call a multimodal transport system. Now, multimodal transport system looks at all forms of transport, which you know, water, the railway, the road, and air. So the purpose of the government of Uganda is to develop all of them. And those plans have started to be implemented. So we're not going to say we shall use water and abandon the railway, no. We shall not say we shall use the railway and abandon the airline, no. That's why you see the airline has been also revived, the railway is being revived, and the water is being revived as well. So that's the purpose of government, to provide a multimodal transport system for convenience, because somebody wants to use water because it's near water, another one wants to use the road because the road is near, another one wants the railway. It is more convenient for his type of goods. So it's a multimodal system. We have already started moving oil on water from Kisumu, that is petroleum products, petrol, diesel, from Kisumu to Port Bell. And as I speak, we are starting to work on the Jinja Pier So we shall move oil all the way from Kisumu Steel to Jinja. We are working with Total, Shell, those oil companies, all of them. Yeah, so you can see that water is not a new thing, it's already working. We've been moving from Mwanza to Port Bell, that is Tanzania to Uganda, on water since July 2018, and we have not stopped. Yeah, so there's nothing new about the water. The water is already operating for Uganda's case, even in Kenya, similarly Tanzania.
According to the report, Uganda Railway Corporation made a loss of over 93.3 billion shillings, equivalent to $25.1 million in 2018, making it the worst performer among state-owned enterprises.
Yeah, the performance of the railways is bad. It cannot be denied. Everybody knows. It is even seen. When you talk, people ask you, hey, you work with Uganda Railways, does it still exist? Yeah, you tell them, yes, it exists. But the truth, they don't see you. But that has been an effect of the 11 years of Rift Valley Railways, the concessionaire that was running the private entity that took over the railways for the 11 years. Of course, the government terminated them. The contract was 25 years. After seeing what was going on, government stopped them after the 11th year. Now, the performance is not good, as I said, because the infrastructure is down. When you run the train from Malaba to Kampala, it's actually all the way from Mombasa. On the meter gauge, it is running at 20 kilometers per hour instead of like 70 kilometers or 60 per hour. So you can see. Then secondly, because the infrastructure is down, you get accidents. When the rain comes like these rains, you get the lines flooded, the train cannot move. So then also the equipment, the wagons and locomotives also, they are very old. Those Arabiara that they bought were very old as well. They can't work. So that's the challenge. We don't have equipment, the line is down. So there's no way we could have performed better than what we did. But all the same, what I can tell you, for us we did very well because we ran the passenger train, those who use it from Namave to town, they'll tell you, we run from here to Namave in 40 minutes. The taxi will take you 3 hours, 2 hours, and we charge you 1,000. We've done that every day since Arabia left in January 2018. We have never stopped. We have also run freight business in our poor way. But when you use the train, you save on one container, you save not less than $500 on just one container. So if you plan well, if we deliver late, but if you have a good plan for your business, you can still use us by managing your stocks well. So that you cannot stop us. I'll give you an example that when the ship, like the ship that is running from Port Bell to Mwanza, it carries 22 wagons. Now 22 wagons, each of them carries 40 tons. 40 tons is 4 maguru kumi, if you know maguru kumi. Now that you multiply 4 by 22, that is 88 maguru kumi once. Just one trip from Port Bell to Mwanza. Similarly, when the train moves from Malaba to Kampala, it is carrying also 88 maguru kumis just once. So imagine the impact that you are doing on the road by reducing the traffic on the road and the overloading. You've seen the roads how they are being worn out. So we are doing well.
However, the acting managing director notes that poor performance has been caused by a multiplicity of challenges, including vandalizing the railway lines, stealing, and inactiveness of other railway line transmission in Mbale, Malaba, among others that were once active in the country, culminating to the losses.
Challenges, I would give the challenges, but also appeal to Ugandans. Challenge number one, vandalism of railway assets. The railway line. Somebody comes with a machine and cuts the railway line. That is the same as somebody coming and digging the tarmac out of the what? Of the road, or digging a big hole in the road. So somebody comes and cuts the materials and takes them to smelt them into these iron bars and what. We have trucks there outside that we have arrested. So that's challenge number one, stealing of railway materials of the truck. The sleepers, these things that hold the line together, they're also taken often, and we keep running up and down, chasing thieves and the like. Secondly is encroachers. If you've seen where the rail line is, especially in the towns, people have decided to take over the land of the railways. They're doing the business on the rail line. They think it is theirs. Even if you tell them what, they don't believe. Even if you put markers to show them the boundary, They don't believe that that's government land, but we appeal to them to really understand government also owns its property. Doesn't mean that government never owns anything. So whoever is on the railway line as an encroacher, we appeal to them to leave. We've been writing to them, and we are going to put in place a program letting people leave the railway line voluntarily. For the thieves, we have really become tough on them, and they know it. When we get you now, we take the truck. So we no longer like take the thief only. We take everything that we find plus the truck, and we are going to auction those trucks. Achievements we've made, just 1 year since we took over from the concessionaire, we reopened the route from Kampala to Tanzania via Lake Victoria, Portobello, Mwanza, had been closed for the 10 years of the concession. We opened it in 6 months and it has never stopped working. We have also been able to run the passenger service, as I told you, non-stop. We have also renovated many of our assets. We have sent away majority of thieves. Most of the lines were uprooted during the concession time. Nothing has been uprooted during our time. We are also opening the route to Kisumu, as I told you. It has opened actually because the first consignment came from Kisumu. And if you go to Portobello, you find the fuel tankers there. The fuel has started coming. We are working on Ginger Pier. In a month, it is going to be active as well, the Ginger Port, also to move products from Kisumu and Tanzania as well to Ginger. We are starting the construction of Tororo-Gulu line. The construction is starting next month in February. That's a new development as well. The purpose of that one to serve the oil sector as those developments of the oil regions. We are also completed the processes for a project to renew the Kampala-Malaba line. Soon you are going to see a new line from Kampala to Malaba up to Kyengera. You are going to see a new passenger service running from Kyengera to Mukono, running from Kampala to Portobello, of course to serve the commuters, the city goers. So basically we are doing a lot of things together with the government. The intention of government, to make it clear, people should remove from their thinking that the standard gauge will not come. The standard gauge and the meter gauge are all the rail lines, and the government will provide both of them. The easiest thing is to first renovate, because it needs more money to have the meter gauge back, as you also work on the standard gauge. That is what should be clear. The standard gauge is coming in its fullness all the way, all the lines from Malaba, Gulu, Kampala, up to Rwanda, Tanzania, all of them will be done. But even Rome was not built in one day. So it's a program of years. Years. Even you can't build your home in 1 month. It's a small thing, but you can't build it in 1 month. You plan it for 10 years and progressively you do it. So government has so many things to do, the roads, the airline, the what, education, health. So all those things are being balanced, and within that program, the railway also fits in, and you are going to enjoy the railway, and we are going to put a smile on the face of Ugandans.
The report also noted that more than half of Uganda's public enterprise are costing taxpayers heavily in losses, and suggested that it would be better if managed under public-private partnership. According to the report, only 14 out of 29 state enterprises analyzed made profits in 2018, with the Bank of Uganda making over 425 billion shillings, equivalent to $114.5, National Social Security Fund with 240 billion shillings, equivalent to $64.8 million, and National Water and Sewage Corporation with 51 billion shillings, equivalent to $13.7 million respectively. The worst performing agencies included Uganda Electricity Transmission Company Limited and the Civil Aviation Authority, with losses of 75.3 billion shillings and 21.8 billion shillings respectively. In addition to making losses, a number of companies are unable to meet their long-term dates for state enterprise with a debt ratio of more than 50%, implying that their total assets were insufficient to cover their total debt, which were Uganda Electricity Distribution Company Limited, Uganda Electricity Generation Company Limited, and Uganda Electricity Transmission Company Limited. The report then recommends that there is need for government to improve on the supervision and monitoring of its entities by introducing performance-based contracts with clear targets, and the government could also employ public-private partnerships.
Na shukran sana mpenzi mtazamaji aliyejiunga nami kutoka mwanzo wa kipindi hiki hadi tamati. Mimi ni Sadamu Bale, tuonane Alhamisi ijayo.
Smart 24.